Da-da-da! What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never popped into one of my lives before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And we have this show here, What's My Good Cheer? It's a show that I've had on Instagram for a few years now. And because this is home, this is where I started my story, started this journey. This is where my loyalties lay. And I am grateful for Instagram, for it being there to allow me to practice my craft. But I am here now. I am here now. And I hope if you discover this channel, because that is my hopes, that anybody that pops into this live actually stumbled onto it. And that my wish is that you might find something that will be consoling to your soul, right? Lots of times we have difficulties in our lives. And this is where the topic's coming today, because we have got the word this week, right? We'll pull it out right here. We got this word this week that we picked, comfort. And I am drawn because it came to my mind a couple of times this morning to go through some pictures of mine and to pick out a few pictures. And I ignored that thought. And gratefully, as I got myself a cup of coffee and sat down in contemplation of how we're going to come at this word, comfort, today, a different perspective. And again, that thought came to mind. Go through your pictures, and then I don't have time to go through my pictures, but I don't know if I'm grateful for it. But finding those pictures didn't take me long, because we had a little bit of a flood in my apartment this past year, and it actually destroyed quite a bit of my pictures. I don't know if it destroyed, but everything kind of got glued together. So I kind of went through quickly those pictures that didn't get glued together. And I came up with a few pictures, because I always do believe that the best evidence is the evidence, right? Right. We all want to learn off of people who have experienced some of those things that are holding us back, that we experience, right? It's not misery loves company, but sometimes it's in saying, oh my goodness, she was right there where I was at, where I'm struggling. And look, she's got a little bit of control in her life. And we're not going there, not even close, because in my comfort, it is not something that I have overcome yet, right? In my family, and here it comes, my comfort is my weight. My comfort is in food. Epigenetically, gluttony is something that my family has used as a coping mechanism for generations. I can say in my own recent memory of generations, because my grandmother on my father's side was well over 500 pounds. I had two uncles, one that was close to 700 pounds, and another one, I never met him. He was gone before I was, maybe I was born, but I don't remember him in any way. And then my uncle Les, who was on my mother's side also, who was also over 600 pounds. There was great fear when I was born that trait would be instilled in me, that I would grow up to be obese also. Looking at my childhood photos, I don't know where that thought could have come from, because I was neither obese, or did I have the framing or the physique of somebody, because of I was so hyper even as a child, that it just doesn't seem to me, in looking back in some of these pictures, that could have even been a possibility that I would have been obese. In the 60s and 70s, in the school systems, right, there wasn't much in the way of obesity. When you look at the school systems now and the children growing up, you can see it's quite a bit of a problem, isn't it? There are more children obese than there are children at normal weights. In my day when I went to school, that was not the norm. I might have been the only person in school who was obese, and maybe two. Maybe there was a boy, maybe there was a girl, but it was so unique and so odd that, right, I did stand out like a sore thumb. Obesity, right? It's kind of again that community, right? Who's If you're overweight, you're not going to pick on somebody and point out that they're overweight because, right, you're mutually in that same flow. But I just said too, right, that as a small child, you didn't see that framework in me, that energy, right? Even as a child, I was very energetic, and I just don't see where that mentality could have come from, but it came, right? My parents, I don't know, understand, right? I'm only looking epigenetically in the family line that maybe my family, because of these problems that ran in their families, that they had that fear initially. I was firstborn. My mother did have what we call now, and I'm going to assume because there was no diagnosis then, but I'm going to assume my mother had postpartum depression, severe postpartum depression. I had an opportunity to discuss some of the problems. If you haven't caught yet, my problem, my issue, my fear, my trauma is that relationship that I had with my mother, and that codependent relationship, because my father was my savior, wasn't he? He loved me dearly, and yet my dad was always away with his work. My dad was an entrepreneur, he was a commercial fisherman. He was gone for months at a time, and maybe that was his own form of escapism from the pain, right? My mother was a narcissist. I've come to understand through the lessons, right? And that's why the lessons are so important, that we get to understand, because these are questions I had all my life. And yes, I had that opportunity as an adult to sit down and ask these questions to my mother as an adult myself, questions that as a child I would have been too afraid to ask, or if I did ask, there would be a painful lesson in even having the nerve to ask these questions. But again, that comfort. So we're just going to draw it back to game, because I do go down. But I wanted you to have a little bit of understanding of a dynamic family that I came from, and the understanding that there was some fear in that family that I would become obese. And I eventually did. As I moved into my teen years, I did become obese. What you think about is realized. And this was my right first experience with it, but I didn't understand it. These are understandings I came to very late in my life, and I'm going to say well into my 50s that some of these understandings came to me. But that part of that work that I do in that healing for myself, so that I can move forward in my life in the hopes that I can help others, right, move forward in their lives through that pain, through that not understanding, through all those questions that we ask and never get any answers for. And some of those traits, and here we go into the comfort, right? Those traits that we pick up along the way that help us feel comfortable in that pain, in comfortable in not having those answers for ourselves, right? I was gifted with discernment, so I was able to see some truths that were, or some untruths that were being projected onto me as truths. And I didn't understand why, but I could see that they were untruths, right? So I grew up with a lot of confusion. And after a while being taught, right, honor your mother, honor your father, right, that these were my mentors, these were my guardianships, this was my influence. And yes, I was influenced, and right, I became that obese kid that became an obese adult, that became that person that struggles up and down, up and down. It's so much better, right? It's so much better now than it was, but I still struggle very grateful. Very, I'm grateful. I don't know where that word come from, but I was going to say greatly. I was going to say I struggle greatly. And as we move forward in the lessons, right, more of this story will be played out. But I thought that I would let you know a little bit about my comfort. My comfort is my addiction to food. My comfort in my sorrow, my rewarding myself for the hard work that I do, for the tough week that I had, for that person not listening to me, not being seen, not being heard, right? For those listening to all those people that were saying I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, right? All those limiting beliefs and the way we comfort ourselves. And you're right, your limiting beliefs, the way you comfort yourself is going to be different. The way, maybe it's not, right? But you'll find something to help you cope with the difficulties, cope with the pain, because it was very painful being an obese child. And because my father had congenital heart disease, he was always on special diets. So it was easy to put me on a special diet with my father. But my father was a compulsive gambler. My father was away quite a bit of the time. So those special diets were not consistent in my life, right? My dad being compulsive gambler, if he gambled too much, that bag of rice was coming into the household and there was 101 recipes for a bag of rice and I would be off my diet because, right, my father at that time would be the only one to be able to afford to live on that diet, right? Because right, it's very lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, lots of protein, lots of expensive foods. And we know fruits and vegetables, even back then in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, it was very, very expensive, right? So that consistency, right, of being on a diet would be blowing up with that bag of rice coming in or going on to the craft dinner. And then I would be back on the diet, right? And I've gained too much weight or too many people said anything. I'd be back and forth, back and forth. But it was only in that fear. And it because it was so hyper focused, because it was always top of mind. Do you want to grow up to be like your sister? That it became a family problem, right? And I became that example for my sisters, and each one of my sisters suffers greatly, ups and downs, that yo yoing in their weight. And if you have had any idea of how bad it is, and I was talking to my sister, I talk to my sister about this all the time, and we agreed there is only one way for us to overcome our weight, to overcome that obesity, and that is to overcome it because we cannot afford to be obese. We cannot afford to be overweight because it's how we talk to ourselves when we do that, right? And whatever it is for you, right? How you talk to yourself when you do that. And so the only solution is to stop. But how do you stop? I haven't beaten that one yet, but it's an ongoing struggle, right? And here's the proof, here's the evidence. That's me at 300 pounds. That's me and my brother in law at 300 pounds. This is me. Probably 10 years before this. Look at my backside. Not as big as this, but right? That yo-yoing up and down, up and down. Look at me. 300 pounds. Right? Look at me taking pictures with my friends. But I was happy, but I made allowances and accepted some aspects of my life not to be realized, like boyfriends, right? Like boyfriends. I delved into my friendships and I had many, many friends, but this was ongoing. Look at this is me at 16 years old, topping 200 pounds, being probably the only obese person in my school. Here's me, a totally different image of me, right? I'm like 140 pounds or something here. This is after losing maybe 160 pounds and cutting out a picture of me and a guy, some guy that I barely knew or was on friendly terms with, right? But he wasn't a part of my life. And yet I didn't know how to say no after I lost that weight because, right, it was something new to me, right? I was being seen, I was being heard in a positive tone for the first time in my life, right? I was always being seen and I was always being heard, right? It's hard to be invisible when you're 300 pounds, right? When you're 300 pounds, it truly, 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 truly. And again, this is a picture of my sister. She looks nothing like this now, you guys. Oh my goodness, right? Right? It runs in my family. That's just one of my family, right? But this is us as kids, and look at me. This is 6 or 7 years old. This is me. But even in the framing and the sizing, you would never think, right? That wasn't even there. It wasn't even a thought. But even then, I was on the diets. Even then, I was being an example to my sisters as to what not to grow up to be like, right? And let me have a sip of my coffee before we move on. I'm sharing this because the word we have this week is comfort, right? As highly sensitives and as empaths, we're always looking for the comfort. We're always looking for the easy way out. We're always looking for the easiest path, right? The less friction, right? It's why we isolate ourselves. It's why we spend so much time by ourselves because being around others can be painful, right? Those projections are not fun, right? But after a while, we don't even need people to be around us because we'll cause our own pain because we'll pick up that slack, right? Nobody's around to tell us how unattractive we are, how stupid we are, or how lazy we are, right? Being highly sensitive and being empathic, right? It can come across as somebody who's lazy, somebody who's procrastinating. It's just that we just don't want to move because every time we move, every time we come into that action, every time we include ourselves or right or are allowed to be included, we're there to hold, there to hold the pain, and we understand, right? If that pain isn't being dropped in our arms, being highly sensitive and empathic will search it out. Why? Because that's the only way we can be seen, that's the only way we can be heard, right? Is to do for others, is to make a situation or adventure and experience a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more comfortable. And we quite often can be the funny man, but unless we do that work, unless we can even recognize how we comfort ourselves, there isn't a chance, right? And then what will we do? We'll still just fall over ourselves to take care of everybody else, right? Make everybody else smile, everybody else laugh. And our cups just get empty, empty, empty until it gets to the point where we're just an empty cup, or maybe there's just a little bit of residue on the bottom, but somebody's got their straw in there and they're making all those slurpy noises and getting in there and there's nothing left. And what do? We look for the comfort. We look for the comfort, and part of that whole healing process for us is to overcome the problems, not the symptoms, not the weight. I'm right. I could put myself on a diet. I could, and I could lose that 30 pounds. I've done it many, 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 many times, right? But unless you solve the problem, unless you can make the realizations and the understandings, unless you can uh, thread it all together as to what happened, right? There can't be any permanent solution. And if you do find a permanent solution, like I was discussing with you about me and my sisters, the only solution is just not to be fat, just not put the weight on. And then we won't talk to ourselves that way, and we won't add on to it because we're uncomfortable. Just keep adding on more comfort, comfort, comfort. And whatever your comfort is, right? We're talking obviously addictions, right? It was like my addiction. And when we say baby steps, oh my goodness. And you say, oh, but Cindy, you haven't overcome the eating yet. But no, I'm aware of it, right? I'm consistently making efforts, but I have all my life, right? But I believe that in figuring out the solutions, right? And it's not figuring them out, but just keep in the lessons so that the solutions come to me and the realizations come to me. And that realization is, if I'm not thinking about my weight, if I'm not beating myself up about the weight, right? Then it's not as much of a problem, right? If people aren't saying, hey, fatso, right? I'm not going to be looking for that comfort. If I'm not saying, hey, fatso, when I'm looking in the mirror or when I'm getting on the scale or I'm compulsing about getting on the scale every single day, what you think about is realized, right? And this is why that, it's not as bad that I'm not 311 pounds anymore. It's because I am more mature. It's not top of frame. My mind, my hormones aren't going. I don't need to be in that bikini to attract that good looking man, right? That good looking man that I did catch when I lost all that weight. But because I didn't solved the problem, that I only served and dealt with the symptoms, that I was only allowed, I was only allowing myself to lose that weight temporarily, right? Because there are moments then that I need to be comfortable. And what am I going to do to be comfortable? I was going to gamble, or I was going to go into the food, right? And I did both when I was married. And it contributed to my marriage falling apart. No doubt, right? Because I was taking care of the symptoms and I never took care of the problem. And that weight just came back. When it came to the gambling, right? I listened to that advice that I gave my sister. Right? You just can't, right? You just can't be a fat person, but you have to eat, right? But I use that to the gambling. You just can't gamble anymore. That's it. You just can't gamble anymore. And I said that to myself, and because I don't have to breathe gambling, right? I just don't have to I just can't go to the bars, right? Just can't drink alcohol. I can't do lottery tickets. I can't do scratch and wins, right? I can't do, I bet you. I'm not gambling anymore. And I wiped it out by saying, you just can't do it anymore. And I was able to do that because I'm not breathing it, right? But how do you stop eating, right? You have to eat. You have to eat. So I'm still battling it. And epigenetically, it's been going on for generations and generations, but I'm aware of it now, right? Maybe that work is for my nieces and my nephews and my great nieces and my great nephews, but I'm still doing the work. I'm still trying, and I might not ever overcome it in my life, but I suspect that if I continue to take the lessons, that eventually, right, some kind of realization will come to me. And my hopes is that in telling this story, right, of one of my coping mechanisms, one of my comforts. And if you're just popping in, right, this is me. This is me at 311 pounds, not afraid to show my face, but I'm about 20 years old there. There's me, about 16 years old, right? Right? It was just that weight started coming on. Believe it or not, I was on diet since I was a little kid, but that weight truly didn't come on until I hit puberty. And then that's when the weight started to come on, right? But they got to work on it early, but it is, right, the way I cope. And I'm going to have to throw some gratefulnesses out there, right? Because that way I coped in the gambling, right? It destroyed my marriage. It truly did. Didn't destroy my life, right? Grateful for my good health, right? That food, all that comfort that I took in, it didn't destroy my life, right? It tried. It didn't destroy my life, but it caused me a lot of problems, but problems that I was willing to take a look at. And it's my hopes that I continue to do this work that, right, these solutions will come to me, and not maybe for my own benefit, might even just be on my deathbed that I finally figure it out, but for my nieces, for my nephews, for my great nieces, for my great nephews, right? That maybe in the family epigenetics that we won't have to suffer that anymore. And maybe because obesity was just one symptom, right? That was only one coping mechanism, that we can work on the problem, right? That maybe the gambling can be gone, because gambling was in my family, obesity was in my family. Um, Drinking. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and a really bad one, of those really bad ones, right? And when you look at the world right now, and you look at people living in tents on the sidewalk, that was my grandfather, right? And he lived in bus shacks. It's in the family, going back, and it has to start with somebody, right? It didn't start with me. My nephew woke up long before I did, right? But we're all on different stories, all on different journeys, and he's contributing a little bit different than what I'm contributing, right? But I am grateful. Oh, and I should mention, my nephew is over 300 pounds too, right? I have a nephew. So these problems have not gone anywhere. They are just as rooted as they ever were, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't take these baby steps. We're going to talk about baby steps, because I'm a true believer in baby steps, right? That's too big. I might never ever ever. I can't believe that ever, even though I've been a skinny person a few times, I can't ever believe that I'll be able to keep it off, because it's like the kid who cried wolf, the boy who cried wolf. Like, I've gained the weight back so many times, right? That maybe it might not happen in my lifetime, but that's not going to stop me from taking those baby steps. It's not going to stop me from trying, because I've got to be that evidence of never giving up, right? Of never giving up, in finding a way, in adapting and conquering, right? And it can't be just find another way to be comfortable, though it works, right? Part of my coming off gambling, a big majority of it, was starting my YouTube channel. And I became compulsed and obsessed with my brand, and that's what helped pull me away. So that was something that you might want to consider. So far, right, it works. I have not gambled in 4 years, and it was ready to take me down, and I was ready to allow it to take me down. But because of my own determination of never giving up, finding a way, right, giving up is just not an option. I found another way. Was it the right way? I don't know. I'm still looking at some of those lessons, and I'm still leaving myself open to possibilities, right? But in the meantime, if I have to work on the symptoms, I'll work on the symptoms, right? But the idea is to take those baby steps that I know work in other aspects of my life, and other things that I'm doing right now, that I'm making movement in my life. And a lot of that movement was baby steps, because, well, for the most part, was that lack of courage. And that's another lesson for another day, because I know That word courage, it's here somewhere. It's 100%. We're going to get to it, right? I'm using my be kind cup again, only because in this process we have to be kind to each other. Right? Like, right? I don't need to be reminded of the things I'm not getting right? But the thing is, it really doesn't go away. It's always on the back of my mind. And when it has played such a big role in your life, right? Like I said, it's hard to be invisible when you're 300 pounds, right? And it's impactful in so many ways, right? And I have to say that I picked up that baton and right beat myself over it too. All truth. I ran with it. Right? But at any moment, I can make a different choice. And I consistently make those choices. And I'm so used to change right now that it doesn't surprise me when things happen in my life and I just wake up to it and go, oh my goodness, I've been doing that for a few months now. Didn't even realize I made that change. Oh my goodness, right? I lost that 25 pounds. Right? How did I do that? I wasn't even giving it any thought and it just kind of slipped off. And that's why, because I wasn't giving it any thought. Okay, you guys, I've got to run off today. We'll be back at it tomorrow. We are on the word comfort, a different perspective tomorrow, but I wanted to kind of share my story about comfort and how I comfort myself, right? And you guys have to see the evidence because how can you guys put in that effort yourself unless you recognize, right? Those were my prime years. Those were my, right? Those years that I was looking for a husband. I was in love at this time, right? I thought I found him, right? Those were my baby making years, right? I am accidentally motherless, right? It wasn't my intent for that to happen, right? But it is in the choices that we make, right? Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer, and we'll see each other tomorrow.